Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ, presented by Geico. Our Gary Parrish constantly updating his NBA mock draft. In the latest edition of the Top 10, we have some movement. Clingan moving up the board some spots, and Topic with the latest news of his partially torn ACL getting pushed down. The NBA draft taking place on June 26th. Our draft experts, Matt Norlander, Gary Parrish, joining us now on HQ. So, Gary, in your latest mock, you have the Washington Wizards landing Reed Sheppard with that #2 pick. It's been like that for a few weeks now. Is it safe to say that Sheppard is your favorite prospect in this year's draft, Gary?
He really is. Jenny, I understand all of the stuff that Alex Sarr brings to the table as an impactful defensive player, the projections going forward, or is that he could someday perhaps develop into what Jaren Jackson Jr. has developed into in Memphis. I understand why he might be the #1 overall pick, but if I were just like putting everything I got into who do I believe in, it is Reed Sheppard, the one-and-done freshman out of Kentucky, the reigning CBS Sports National Freshman of the Year. I understand that, you know, he's on the small side and he came off of Kentucky's bench, and there are some questions among some, but he's just an elite shot maker, an elite shot creator, better than some people might realize on the defensive end, a better athlete than some people might realize. And I would never compare him or anybody else to Steph Curry because that seems absurd. Steph Curry is the greatest shooter of all time and one of the all-time greats in the NBA. But I do remember in the draft process, in Steph Curry's draft, people, some at least, got so focused on what they thought he couldn't do that they couldn't pay attention to enough the things that were undeniable with Steph Curry and Davidson. And I think a lot of that might be happening with Reed Sheppard as well. Simply put, I'm a believer, not just that he's going to be a good NBA player, but that he's going to be a star.
Now, Reed Sheppard's stock is something to track and follow as we get close to the draft here. You see GP's mock draft, and he's got him going at 2. I think that is possible. And talking to people around the league, there is a little bit more of a split opinion in terms of will he prove to be 4, 5, 6 years down the road someone that should have gone top 5 in this draft, or could he potentially? I don't think this is going to happen, but in still talking to some people, they wonder if because this top 10 seems so interchangeable, will a franchise try and trade up to get a player that they desire more? And will Sheppard, as a result, fall a little bit more to 5, 6, 7, or 8? One thing that I think will prevent that from happening is we're now obviously a few weeks removed from the combine, but he tested better at the combine than I think a lot of people anticipated. And so because of that, he only reinforced his value, his attributes. Obviously, he's going to interview extremely well. And the shot making is obviously well proven there. So he's a mighty, mighty intriguing prospect. I tend to lean in on a lot of what he does. And I would bottom line everything with Reed Sheppard, where even if you think he's in the top 5 conversation somewhere, ultimately the things he does well, like shooting, I just see that translating minimally. Like, he's not going to shoot 50% north of that in the NBA. That's not going to happen. But like the idea that he won't be a 40% three-point shooter at the pro level, hard for me to envision that not being the case. And so I'm pretty aligned with GP here on his value in a draft that is filled with a bunch of unknowns.
And Gary mentioned it, Reed Sheppard, CBS Sports National Freshman of the Year honors. Guy's got a lot of talent. Next up, we're going to talk about the Spurs, and you have him snagging Donovan Clingan, who is that monster in the NCAA tournament, helping Yukon to their 2nd straight national championship. You think about it, that would pair him with Victor Wembanyama in San Antonio, Gary. And I know that this is something you moved Clingan up your draft board. So what went into that decision?
Well, Jenny, there are multiple reports that there are multiple teams looking to move into the top 5 of this draft to take Donovan Clingan. The Grizzlies among them. They got an obvious need in the middle after dealing Steven Adams in the middle of this past season. So it does look like Clingan is going to go in the top 5 somewhere. And I know on a very surface level it might seem confusing. Didn't they just take a guy who is projected to be the best center in the world going forward last year with the #1 pick in the draft? why would they take another center just a year later? The answer to that question is that Wembanyama is such a unique prospect and player that I can easily envision him playing with a more traditional center like Donovan Clingan going forward. And if Clingan can sit there and be your traditional big in the middle, and you just let Wembanyama float around and block shots the way Anthony Davis sometimes does with the Lakers, the way Rudy Gobert sometimes does with the Timberwolves, the way Jaren Jackson Jr. often does with the Grizzlies, that becomes devastating and really difficult to score against. And we're watching, like, you know, Minnesota just eliminated the reigning world champions from the playoffs using two bigs in the front court. So I know with the small ball Warriors, we got into a phase where everybody was looking to go smaller, but getting big is sort of a new thing in the NBA in the year 2024. And given that Wembanyama's skill set allows him to play with just about any type of other front court prospect, Clingan and Wembanyama being in that San Antonio front court for years to come could be really devastating in the Western Conference.
That would be fascinating, GP. I'd love to see that. Personally, I'd love to see a team go in on bigs all the way and see if you can really have a paradigm shift and to see if it works. So I would root for that. To me, Clingan's range seems as high as 2, as low as 7. I think he is the one prospect that's in that top 10 range that I think is most likely to be drafted by a team that tries to trade to get him. So we'll see if, and GP alluded to that, obviously, a couple minutes ago. So we'll see if that's the case there. Also, keep in mind, he had foot issues that lingered with him and actually impacted the start of his sophomore season. As long as teams are healthy with the medical, he is a big guy. He had some tendon issues in his foot. As long as they're good with that, but trust me, big man, they're going to be very, very aware of that. Some teams might be wary of it, but he is someone who, if he gets the right situation, I think Clingan's instincts and the way that he's able to play in ball screen defense, he's going to be capable and should be a long-term, reliable starter at the NBA level.
We're going to keep it with San Antonio. 2 top picks in the top 10, so 4 and 8 right now. And if you look at their next selection, Gary, you like Nikola Topic there. The news coming out, though, I mean, talk about terrible timing, the last day or two, that he has a partially torn ACL. And despite that, though, you still have him going top 10, right?
Yeah, listen, the injury hurts. There's no getting around that. There are some people who had San Antonio taking him with the 4th pick in this draft as a projected top 5 pick. And so this is going to slide him down a little bit, I would assume, but not too far. And if you're San Antonio and you can still get the guy that you might have been interested in taking at 4 with the 8th pick in the draft, you got to feel pretty comfortable with that. The truth is, in the NBA draft, particularly with ACL injuries and various other injuries, there are some things that would be real obstacles to getting a franchise to spend a top 10 pick. But ACL injuries and knee injuries like this haven't historically been those things. We've seen players, different injuries, but players enter a draft, on the sidelines and have their, what would normally be their rookie seasons very much up in the air and still get drafted, incredibly high in a given year. Kenyon Martin's an example, Joel Embiid, another one. And I think Topic is going to be the latest example of that. He will not go in this draft probably where he would have gone, say, a month ago if we would have done it, given the injury, but he's still going to go high, and I think, yes, in the lottery, perhaps in the top 10.
This will be an interesting one. Because of San Antonio's player development system and how it's traditionally drafted, it would not surprise me if the Spurs go here. He's 18 years old, 6'6", fairly physical, good lead guard, good passing, great passing facets to his game. But I almost wonder if he is the player who might be most susceptible to a noticeable drop. Now, there won't be a ton of buzz on it on draft night. You'll remember Cam Whitmore out of Villanova became an extremely big story because he absolutely plummeted on draft night last year. This wouldn't be that because, frankly, most of the American audience that's going to tune into the draft, they're not familiar with this game. But because of the injury and the uncertainty there and the rehab involved, you might see him slip a little bit. But he is an intriguing long-term prospect and could be, we'll see, again, just 18 years old. Maybe we look up in 5 years and it's a bit of a lost first season, but he winds up being someone who is not just a capable starter, but really emerges as a borderline star in the league down the road. But some team's going to have to draft him on faith and trust in his abilities and the program and the organization's ability to rehab him properly and get him into their system eventually, but obviously not immediately.
And it is expected that he is going to travel to the U.S. in the coming days, will be evaluated by NBA team doctors who will decide on that next course of action for him and a plan moving forward. So we will have to wait and see on that. All right. We are all on Dan Hurley watch right now, rumored to be the next head coach of the Lakers. Now, Norlander, I'll start with you here. Give me a prospect that the Lakers could target at 17 that would fit Hurley's coaching style.
Well, okay, let's be clear on a couple things here. We're on Dan Hurley watch. Okay, we'll wait and see when his decision comes in. Hopefully we'll have something there by Sunday. And so if he does join in, the idea that Hurley would then be able to step into the front office and say, here are the guys that I'm most interested in, they're going to listen to him, but the Lakers have been going through a process in which they're going to have a number of different players available to them that they're going to be keying in on here. It's not going to be the likes of a Bronny James. The idea that Bronny James would actually be there in the first round, to me, not that likely. I'd say around 17, someone that actually fits. I'm looking through my list here. Maybe someone, if he's there, Johnny Furphy out of Kansas, maybe. He's someone that I actually think could be a nice plug-and-play guy. His stock absolutely rose. He is young, but having come from another great fellow college coach in Bill Self, he's someone that pops to me. What the Lakers do, depending on if Hurley isn't the coach, obviously is going to be the subject of a lot of speculation and intrigue because there is certainly work to be done. Actually, it was just before we did this hit, I happened to be talking to an NBA source, and that source pointed out to me, one, keep in mind, it's not likely that LeBron James will leave, but he is an unrestricted free agent, and if he does return, look at what they have beyond LeBron and AD. Look at that roster, and look how much better the West is getting. So this is actually a fairly important draft for the Lakers just to try and keep pace so they're not fighting again, which, frankly, my source said he fully expects to be the case, to even get into the playoffs next season. So that 17th pick might loom as large as any other pick that's not in the top 10 of the first round of this year's draft.
Just to highlight what Norlander said, I agree. I can't imagine Bronny James would be the 17th pick in this draft. That's a valuable asset, and I understand trying to keep the NBA's all-time scoring leader happy, but you cannot spend a 17th pick on his son. I would prefer an older plug-and-play guy for the Lakers, somebody like Devin Carter or Tristan da Silva, given that, you know, LeBron James only has so much time left, and you should be, at least in my opinion, trying to maximize that in every way possible. But in my latest mock draft, Carter is off the board. Da Silva is off the board. At 17, I've got the Lakers taking Jared McCain, the one-and-done guard, out of Duke. Simply put, when you have Anthony Davis and LeBron James on the court, you can never have too much shooting. You often don't have enough, and that is the main thing Jared McCain brings to the table. He is an elite knockdown shooter. A little on the small size, and he's obviously young, but to circle this back to Dan Hurley, you know, his reputation as a player developer should be pivotal here. You know, Dan Hurley famously, when he was on a podcast earlier this offseason, when asked what does he look for in the recruiting process in terms of players, he said this winning stuff. You know, the shooting and the dribbling and the athleticism, that's all easy to see, but you need people who are made of the right stuff and who prioritize the right things. And you ask anybody who's ever been around Jared McCain, John Shire included, they say nothing but great and glowing things. So he's a really interesting prospect. He brings that one valuable asset to the table in shooting, and I think he fits perfectly with what the Lakers are trying to do moving forward.
Okay, so you both made it very clear that you don't believe Bronny James will be in that pick 17 for the Lakers, but a topic we must discuss because that's what we do here in sports media, and it could potentially happen depending on what LeBron decides and what he says. If Bronny James does end up with the Lakers and Dan Hurley ends up with the Lakers, a lot of hypotheticals here, how could you see Hurley helping develop Bronny James at that next level? We'll start with you, Matt.
Listen, you know,
or Gary, whoever wants to start.
DP, I cede to you, my friend.
Well, I would just say, listen, Dan's reputation as a player developer is well documented. I mean, he lost multiple important pieces from a national championship team and then won another national championship in part because of internal development. Most notably, Tristan Newton, who went from a very good but kind of a role player on that first national championship team to the star of the second national championship team. So this is reportedly among the things that the Lakers are interested in when they target Dan Hurley, like his ability to take young people and make them the best versions of themselves. So not only if you're the Lakers would you be excited about Dan Hurley working with Bronny James, if you're LeBron James, you should be excited about it. I don't know that we have a clear indication at this point of exactly how or even if Bronny James will end up in Los Angeles, but certainly most people are operating under the assumption that as of this moment, and that's just as of this moment, that we're going to look up and in Los Angeles you're going to have Dan Hurley, LeBron James, and Bronny James, and those three people, I would assume, are going to work well together.
They might. I don't like the carnival aspect to that, to be honest. There's just a lot that comes with that. But Dan Hurley, really good player development guy. And, I mean, Bronny James is not, his name was not Bronny James. He would not be picked in this year's draft. He still may well not get picked, I guess. But if he does wind up, again, under this hypothetical, if he does go to L.A. and Dan Hurley does accept the Lakers job here in the next 48 to 72 hours, how would that work? I do like the prospect because of Hurley coaching up Bronny James and trying to get him on a path to where he can actually eventually maybe be a contributing member of an NBA franchise. It will take a bit. It will take a while. The one thing that I need to repeat that we've mentioned on the Eye on College Basketball podcast plenty is Bronny James has been ultra coachable for essentially his entire upbringing. There's never been any hint of entitlement when it comes to that. He wants to be coached hard, has a really good reputation as a teammate. He just has certain limitations on his game right now as it pertains to the NBA. What's funny to me is Bronny James could have, in an alternate universe, Bronny James could have gone to the portal. Dan Hurley wouldn't have been offered the Lakers job. He could have been coached by Dan Hurley at Yukon. He could have used the extra year of college. That's what I would have liked to have seen. But this is the reality that we find ourselves in. And I do think ultimately that Dan Hurley, knowing him so well and how he operates, would be about as good of a coach as you could ask for to help build up James's skill sets and his development as he enters into the league. That is, of course, if he winds up being drafted by the league.
Gotta love hypotheticals, right, guys? That's what we do here. But looking at that Yukon program, though, it's as high profile as it gets. So much success there, so much history there. So, Matt, give me some replacement options for Yukon if Hurley does jump.
Okay, so I think we have to start with Connie Young, who's the associate head coach there, and then potentially Luke Murray, who's also on staff. This is, again, if Dan Hurley leaves. I think that they will get long, hard looks, and I would personally put Kamani in the lead in that race. Understandably so. He's the top assistant there and has done so much and is responsible for so much of what UConn's been able to accomplish there. From there, in talking to sources, my expectation is if Dan Hurley does not take the Lakers job, the athletic director, Dave Benedict, who hit it out of the park in hiring Dan Hurley back in 2018, he is going to do his diligence. In fact, I don't have this as straight intel. This is just knowing the business and how it works. Benedict almost certainly is reaching out to agents of other potential coaches that just to see, would you be interested in this job? Because UConn finds itself in an intriguing spot here if Hurley leaves. If you keep someone on staff and promote from within, you probably will not have as many defections into the portal in that case, and you help yourself in the short term, and maybe you set yourself up for the long term. But if you go outside and see if you can get a bigger name with someone who has a reputation and a track record of being a successful head coach, then you're going to lose more players. The short term is going to be the loss in how relevant you are. You might, plummet out of GP's offseason top 25 and 1, and from there we wait and see on what happens. I would be intrigued by TJ Otzelberger, although he has Midwest ties. I think he's a name worth knocking on. There's been some Bruce Pearl stuff up there because he's from the Northeast. I don't really see that all that much. And to be honest, this is kind of strange. I'm not saying I put this at like sub 2%, but I'm intrigued by the prospect of Billy Donovan do they not try and sell the world to Billy Donovan to get him to leave the Bulls and come and coach UConn? Because I was told that he would have at least entertained a conversation with Kentucky had they been willing to wait. Kentucky was not willing to wait. He was still in the middle of trying to coach in the playoffs and get the Bulls into the playoffs. So those are just a couple names. But ultimately, my expectation is that Kamani Young would probably get the bump up if Hurley leaves for the Lakers. And all of this stuff, as Parrish well knows, this is all connected. This is stuff that Hurley is weighing on his mind and on his conscience as he goes through this courtship with the Lakers to see, is this how I want to leave the program? Do I want to do this right now? Will I have other opportunities? I find it to be very, very, very fascinating. And I think UConn just doesn't have a lot of great options right now because of where it lands in the calendar for as good of a job as it is.
Listen, if Billy Donovan wants to coach your basketball program, you should hire him. And so if UConn can go down that path, it probably should. But for what it's worth, I was talking to my friend Chris Mannix from Sports Illustrated yesterday, who covers the NBA, and he was pretty definitive. Billy Donovan is not going to voluntarily leave the NBA for college basketball. That's at least what he believes, and so we'll see. Long story not so long. If I'm UConn and I believe in Kamani Young and or Luke Murray, I would go in one of those directions. If you can promote from within and try to keep this thing together and keep the train on the tracks, that is the preferable way to do this. And ultimately, I do expect that to be the path. If Dan Hurley is the next coach of the Lakers, the next coach of UConn, I'd be surprised if he's not already on staff.
Fellas, we covered a lot in this one. Matt Norlander, Gary Parrish, UConn, the Lakers, mock drafts. We did it all, and you can find more from these two on the latest edition of the Eye on College Basketball. They go deeper into that topic we were just discussing. If Dan Hurley does jump, is he going to have those California dreams? And what happens next for the champs in UConn? Gary Parrish, Matt Norlander, they're breaking it all down on the Eye on College Basketball podcast.